So a buyer goes to the TpT search engine to find a particular product that they want. And when they type in some specific keywords, TpT turns back a huge, long list of products that match the description that they're looking for. But here's the good question. What makes a buyer stop scrolling through TpT search and click through to a product? The answer to that question is, of course, covers. What makes a buyer drawn to particular covers or scroll past particular covers? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be covering the top 3 mistakes that sellers make with their covers and how you can correct that to have a winning cover that will catch the eye of your buyer, make them stop their scroll through the TpT search and click on through to your product. Quick reminder before we get started, make sure you like this video and subscribe to my channel. I put out videos every single Monday. You don't want to miss them. But let's go ahead and let's talk about 3 of the biggest mistakes that I see TpT sellers make all the time when it comes to their covers. And let's face it, we're teachers, right? Most of us don't have a background in art. We don't have a background in graphic design. We don't have a background in marketing. And so sometimes it's kind of hard to know what is going to catch the eye of a buyer. But a really good starting place to figuring out what you should be doing is figuring out what you shouldn't be doing. Because when it comes to graphic design and when it comes to designing your covers and designing something that's appealing to your eye, we're all gonna have different tastes. But there are some things that no matter how different your taste is, nobody should be doing. So let's dive into that. The number 1 mistake that I see TpT sellers make all the time is trying to sell their product with their cover. Right? What this means is they have so many different text boxes and overlays and 5 different pictures of their product cluttering the cover up. And so what ends up happening is they're trying to fit all of the information that they can about their product onto the cover. And in doing so, it creates this sort of chaotic feel, and the eye isn't able to focus on any part of the cover. Okay? And so what ends up happening then is the opposite of what we want. People start scrolling past because they don't see anything that catches their eye because the cover is so cluttered. And then number 2, what they can see, they can't read because it's all too small because we've tried to cram everything in there, okay? So here's what you have to understand about your cover, and this is incredibly important. Your cover's job is not to sell the buyer on your product. That's not the job of the cover. The cover's job is to catch the eye of the buyer, draw them in, and make them curious enough to click on through to learn more about your product. It's the preview's job to sell your product. Now, that is going to be the topic of next week's YouTube video. And once that's out, I'll link to it down in the description below. So you want to be sure and check out that video about perfect previews. But for now, we're going to go back to covers. Okay, so let's think about what a cover is and what a cover's purpose is. Okay. The other day I was in the store and I have been on the hunt for a really good oat milk, and I'm looking for something really particular with my oat milk. I'm looking for an oat milk that does not contain any seed oils in it, which is kind of hard to find. Okay. And I promise I'm going somewhere with this besides just telling you about my oat milk preferences. So as I'm going through the store and I'm looking for oat milk, I see this particular bottle that stood out to me. And it stood out to me for 2 reasons. Number 1, the branding was really simple. It was really pretty. It was attractive, okay? It was an attractive bottle of oat milk, if you can believe that. Number 2, on the front cover, if you will, on the front of the label, it said contains no oils, all right? So those 2 things caught my eye. Now, let me tell you what all was on the product's label, because it was a very clean, simple design. It said that it was oat milk, and then it said contains no oils. That's pretty much it, okay? This is what your cover is supposed to be doing. It is supposed to be catching the eye of the buyer and then telling them the piece of information that is going to be important to them. Now, you may say to yourself, but how do I know what's important to them? Well, if you want to know the answer to that, check out my previous YouTube video where we talk about creating resources that sell. And that is by knowing who your ideal customer is and what it is that they're looking for. So go check out that YouTube video, okay? But we put in the most important information for our buyer, okay? And then what that causes me to do is it causes me to pick up the carton of milk. Now, this is really, really important because what marketers know is that once I've picked up the carton of milk, it is that much closer to being in my cart. If they put every piece of information on the front of their label, I might see something on the front of that label that would keep me from picking it up, okay? And it might cause me to go, you know what? I don't really want sea salt inside of my oat milk. So I'm going to pick up this other carton and look at it. And I may look over at another product and pick it up out of curiosity to turn it around and read the back of the label, right? Well, it's the same way on Teachers Pay Teachers. When your buyer clicks through to your product, they are that much closer to putting it in your cart. Because what happens when I pick up that bottle of oat milk? I'm no longer looking at all of the other options that are in front of me inside of the refrigerator. I'm looking at this particular bottle. And the same thing on Teachers Pay Teachers. When a buyer clicks over onto your product, they're no longer inside the TpT search engine. They are looking at your product. So we don't want to put so much information on the cover that a buyer sees something and they go, I don't know about that, right? And scroll on through. We want to put just enough on there so that they are curious. They know what the product is. They know a little bit of information about it, and they are curious enough to click on through and move away from the TpT search engine, okay? So we're not trying to sell them with our cover. What this means for you is keep your cover simple. Keep it simple. Put a nice picture of your product on there. Minimize the amount of text that you have on your cover and only put key information on there. So you want it to be beautiful, you want it to be simple, and you want it to contain the key information that your buyer needs. Do not feel like the TpT search engine is your only opportunity to sell to your buyer. It is not. That's what your preview's job is. All right, let's move on to number 2, text and font choices. I cannot stress to you how important it is to choose your text and your fonts wisely, okay? So I talked about the text a little bit before when we were talking about putting too much text on there, right? Well, we also have to think about the size of the text. Is it legible from the TpT search engine? And I'm not talking about when you scroll your mouse over it and it pops up the bigger picture. I'm talking about that teeny tiny little thumbnail that they originally see. Can they read the important information? Like we talked about in number 1, you should be whittling down the amount of text that is on your product. You should be narrowing it down to the key information that you want them to know. Can they read that key information? If they can't, then we want to enlarge the font, right? We want to make sure it's big and bold. And this is where we get into font choices. If you're going to use a script font, make sure it's legible. Make sure the buyer doesn't have to squint to see what it is that you wrote, right? I like big, chunky, bold fonts to use on my covers so that the buyer can really see what it is they're getting. And let's say there's a font that you really love for branding purposes. If you want to make it a little bit chunkier, one of the things that I found in PowerPoint is just to outline my text and to go in and to change the width on the outline of the text to make it a little bit bigger and bolder. So I can use the font that I love. It's just going to be a lot bolder and it's going to be a little bit chunkier and heavier, okay? And so we want to make sure with our text and our font choices that we're not making our text too small, that we're not choosing a font that is distracting or that's hard to read. And then the other thing that we want to think about is color choices with this, right? I want to make sure I'm picking colors of fonts that you can read as well. So I'm not going to be trying to use a light yellow font or a light green or anything like that. I'm going to be using some dark fonts or some really light fonts on a dark background, okay? So be really careful of your text and font choices because we are picking very specific pieces of information that we want the buyer to know, and so we want them to be able to read that. Let's talk about number 3. This is showcasing decor instead of the product. This is the third biggest mistake that I see TpT sellers make all the time. Here's the thing. Yes, we want our product cover to be pretty. We want it to be beautiful. We want it to be eye-catching. We want it to be appealing. But here's the thing. If it's beautiful, but it doesn't tell me anything about your product, I'm not going to be interested in clicking on it. okay? And so what I see a lot of people doing is they get, especially around the holiday times, they get all of this pretty clip art or they get this pretty background, and the decor ends up taking up more space than the words or the images of the product, right? We don't want to do that. We have to remember that decor is extra. That's an accessory. What we want to start with is we want to start with a clean slate. We want to put our product photo or our product images in first. And we want to make sure that we can clearly see the product on the cover before we start adding anything else in. Okay, so we put our product in first. And when you're using images of those products, we want to make sure they're nice and big, that they take up the vast majority of the space on your cover. And then we can add in little decorations here and there. Okay, so we want to make sure that that product is the center of attention. Yes, it's really great to have a little bit of additional decor, especially if it's a seasonal item, maybe a couple of little pieces of clip art or something on there to let the buyer know that it is a seasonal item. But we want to still make sure that the product is the star of the show. This week inside of the Rebranded Teacher Facebook group, we are going to be doing a peer cover audit. If you want to be a part of that, get some eyes on your covers to get some personal recommendations for your covers and how your covers can catch the eye of your buyer, then go check out our Facebook group and be a part of that conversation. As always, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like it and subscribe to the channel. I put out weekly videos. I also put out a podcast. So if you're more of a listener, you can check out the podcast inside the link in my description. I'm going to see you guys next week.